They told him to be serious. Stay diplomatic. Talk about tariffs. Talk about Trump. Talk about the threats facing Canada. But today, Mark Carney walked into that room, lifted the World Cup trophy above his head, kissed it like a kid who just won the championship, and showed the entire country a version of leadership nobody expected. And the reaction in that room wasn't just applause, it was belief. Because what happened today wasn't about soccer. It was about a country that's been beaten down by fear and division, suddenly remembering what it feels like to be proud. And the timing of this moment, with everything else swirling around Canada right now, makes it more powerful than most people realize. Let me take you back to that basement in 1986. Mark Carney, sitting with his family, watching Canada play in its first ever World Cup. Mexico. A team of amateurs, students, tradespeople. Canada facing Michel Platini and France in the opening match. They lost all 3 games, didn't score a single goal, but they walked onto that field anyway, wearing the maple leaf, representing a country that barely registered on the global football map. And Carney remembers every second of it. That same kid who watched from his parents' basement is now Prime Minister, standing in front of the actual World Cup trophy, talking about how far this country has come. Not just in football, in everything. Fast forward to today. Canada is ranked in the top 30 football nations in the world. In 2012, they were ranked 112th. That's a 75% improvement. And yes, Carney made sure everyone knew he did the math. The women's team won Olympic gold in Tokyo. Christine Sinclair broke the all-time international goal-scoring record and still holds it. The men's team qualified for Qatar, and they did it by beating the United States in Hamilton during a January snowstorm. Carney was there for that match. He was wearing a heart rate monitor. When Alphonso Davies scored, his heart rate spiked from 60 beats per minute to 178. Think about that image for a second. The former governor of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, the man managing trillion-dollar economies, literally losing his mind watching Canada score against Croatia at the World Cup. That's the version of Mark Carney that Canadians saw today. Not the technocrat, not the guy negotiating trade deals or managing monetary policy. The guy who gets emotional about his country succeeding on the world stage. And the reason that matters is because leadership isn't just about competence. It's about connection. People need to believe their leaders actually care about the same things they care about. And today, Carney made it clear. He cares about Canada winning. Now here's where this story gets bigger than sports. The World Cup trophy didn't just randomly show up in Canada. This was orchestrated. FIFA president Gianni Infantino was there. Alessandro Nesta, one of the greatest defenders in Italian football history, was there. The Coca-Cola Company, one of the largest corporations on the planet, was there as a sponsor. Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the organization behind the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Raptors, Toronto FC, and the new women's basketball team Toronto Tempo, was there. This wasn't a small regional event. This was a globally televised moment, with some of the most powerful figures in international sports and business, standing on stage with the Prime Minister of Canada. And what message does that send? It sends the message that Canada is a country major global institutions want to invest in, partner with, and celebrate. Coca-Cola doesn't attach its brand to countries it thinks are declining. FIFA doesn't bring the World Cup trophy to countries it thinks are irrelevant. These organizations see Canada as a rising market, a stable democracy, and a country with momentum. And that perception matters enormously, especially right now when so many narratives about Canada focus on threats, uncertainty, and decline. But that's just the surface of what's happening here. Because while Carney was on stage celebrating Canadian football, he was also delivering a much larger political message. He announced the largest investment in sports in Canadian history, $750 million, not just for elite athletes, for everyone. Playgrounds, community programs, youth leagues, soccer fields in small towns across the country, from Victoria to St. John's. And he didn't frame it as charity. He framed it as nation building. Because sports do something unique. They create shared moments. They give people something to rally around that isn't partisan, isn't divisive, isn't about left versus right. When Alphonso Davies scores, nobody cares how you voted. When Christine Sinclair breaks a record, the whole country celebrates together. And in a political environment where unity feels impossible, sports offer something rare. A reason to feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. Carney understands this. That's why he keeps connecting Canada's rise in football to the resilience and optimism of Canadians themselves. That's why he talked about coaching academies in Brampton and kids playing in alleyways across the country. That's why he emphasized that the $750 million is for the podium and the playground. He's not just talking about building better athletes. He's talking about building a stronger national identity. And this is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Because for months, the dominant narrative around Mark Carney has been about defense. Defending Canada from Trump. defending the economy from tariffs, defending national unity from separatist tensions. And all of that is real. All of that matters. But today, Carney flipped the script. Today wasn't about defending anything. Today was about celebrating what Canada is becoming. Think about the symbolism. The World Cup is coming to North America in 2026. Canada is co-hosting with the United States and Mexico. Toronto and Vancouver will host matches. Millions of fans from around the world will travel to Canada, spend money in Canadian cities, see Canadian infrastructure, experience Canadian hospitality, and leave with an impression of what this country represents. And that impression will shape how the world sees Canada for years afterward. Carney knows this. That's why he told the crowd to cover the country in flags. That's why he said the sun will shine in Toronto and Vancouver, and Canada will win. He's not just talking about winning football matches. He's talking about winning the larger competition for global perception, investment, and relevance. Now here's the part that should make you pause and think. Compare today's event to the political culture in the United States right now, or the United Kingdom, or France, or Germany. In most Western democracies, the dominant political emotion is anger, fear, resentment, decline. Leaders either feed that anger or get consumed by it. But today, in Canada, the Prime Minister stood on stage with the World Cup trophy, joked about his heartbeat during a football match, and told the country to get ready to celebrate. That contrast is striking. And it's not accidental. Carney is deliberately choosing optimism as a political strategy, not naive optimism, not ignoring the real challenges Canada faces, but optimism rooted in evidence. Canada's football ranking has improved 75%, Olympic gold medals, record-breaking athletes, sold-out stadiums, a $2 billion FIFA World Cup coming to Canadian soil. Those are facts. And Carney is using those facts to build a narrative about a country on the rise. And this is where it gets personal. Because leadership isn't just about policy. It's about belief. Do people believe their country has a future worth fighting for? Do they believe their leaders actually care about that future? Do they believe they belong to something bigger than their individual struggles? Today, for a lot of Canadians, the answer felt like yes. And that matters more than any single policy announcement. Because a country that believes in itself is a country that can withstand external pressure. A country that's proud of its identity is a country that's harder to divide. A country that's confident on the world stage is a country that attracts investment, talent, and opportunity. Carney also made sure to highlight the people making this possible. He thanked Coca-Cola for their sponsorship and community involvement. He thanked Larry Tannenbaum and Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment for bringing excellence to Canada and investing in multiple sports franchises. He praised Alessandro Nesta for bringing world-class talent to Canada and helping raise the level of the game. And he shouted out Carlos Cordero and John Catliff, members of that original 1986 team, one of whom was his classmate at university. This wasn't a corporate speech. This was personal. Carney was telling stories. He was connecting the past to the present. He was showing Canadians that the people who built this moment weren't distant celebrities. They were classmates, neighbors, immigrants who chose Canada, and companies that believed in the country's potential. And when you step back and look at the full picture, what you see is a prime minister using a cultural moment to rebuild national confidence at a time when confidence is desperately needed. Because let's be honest, Canadians have spent the last few months hearing about trade wars, tariff threats, potential economic damage, and political division. That's exhausting. That's demoralizing. And if that's the only story people hear, it shapes how they see their country and their future. But today offered a different story. Today said Canada is hosting the World Cup. Canadian athletes are competing with the best in the world. Canadian cities are attracting global events. Canadian businesses are securing international partnerships. And the Prime Minister is standing on stage with the FIFA World Cup trophy, visibly proud, genuinely joyful, and telling the country to get ready for something special. That shift in tone is powerful. Because people don't just need to know their leaders can manage crises. They need to know their leaders believe the country is worth celebrating. And today Carney made that belief impossible to miss. Now let's talk about what this means going forward. Because the World Cup Trophy Tour is just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Canada Soccer announced 330 projects across the country. Live match viewing events, soccer-themed programs, community celebrations, all designed to make sure every Canadian in every region feels connected to this moment. That's not just sports programming. That's political infrastructure. Because when people gather to watch Canada play, they're not just watching a game. They're participating in a shared national experience. And those experiences build the kind of social cohesion that politics alone can't create. Carney also announced that Canada Soccer is getting a permanent national training center, a home base, a symbol that football in Canada isn't a temporary trend, it's permanent, it's institutional, And it's going to keep growing. And when you combine that with the $750 million investment in sports across the country, what you're seeing is a government that understands culture and identity are just as important as economic policy, maybe more important. Because a strong economy means nothing if people don't believe they're part of a country worth building. So what happens next? The World Cup kicks off in just over a year. Canada will play on home soil. Stadiums will be packed. The whole country will be watching. And if Canada performs well, if Alphonso Davies and the team deliver moments that make the nation's heartbeat spike the way Carney's did in Qatar, the political impact will be enormous. Because sports have a way of cutting through cynicism. They create heroes. They create memories. They create moments where an entire country feels the same thing at the same time. And in a fractured political environment, that kind of unity is priceless. Carney knows this. That's why he's leaning into it. That's why he lifted that trophy. That's why he kissed it. That's why he scored a symbolic goal in front of the cameras. He's showing Canadians that their Prime Minister isn't afraid to be hopeful, isn't afraid to celebrate, and isn't afraid to believe that Canada's best days are ahead. And maybe that's the most important thing a leader can do right now. Not just manage the threats. Not just defend against the attacks. But remind people why their country matters. Why it's worth protecting. Why it's worth believing in. Because here's what this all means going forward. Canada is about to step onto the biggest stage in sports. The world will be watching. And how Canada shows up in that moment. How confident the country looks. How proud the people are. How well the cities perform as hosts. All of that will shape global perception for years. And if Carney can connect that moment to a larger story about Canadian resilience, optimism, and strength, he won't just be celebrating a sporting event. He'll be redefining how Canadians see themselves and how the world sees Canada. That's not just politics. That's not just politics. And today, for the first time in a long time, it felt like Canada had a leader who genuinely believes the country is ready for its moment. The only question left is whether Canadians believe it too.